grief is a natural process and it's just part of the deal, but we're so uncomfortable with it. We're so uncomfortable with people being sad. Like we want to find the silver lining. We want to wrap it up with a bow. We want our person back, right? We want them how they were.
Welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. This is a show presented by Heart and Solutions Counseling Agency. We release new episodes every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central and encourage you to batch up that laundry, put away the dishes, plan for the week ahead, or do any other task that might seem daunting while you give our show a listen. You might just be encouraged to call your therapist, connect with this week's guest, or seek out those services you've been considering for a while but haven't made the commitment to yet. If you are in the state of Iowa and are in need of mental or behavioral health counseling, give us a call at 1-800-531-4236. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Dr. Julie Johnson. I'm the president and founder here at Heart and Solutions Mental Health Behavioral Health Counseling in Iowa.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt. I am our vice president in charge of the behavioral health department. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are designed for people curious about counseling, but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
Our guest today is the host of the Smooth Stones podcast. She is also a certified life after baby loss coach and a certified David Kessler grief educator. We have Amy Watson here with us today. She specializes in helping people after the loss of a child. She's using her own personal experiences to really support those who are going through this type of loss in their family. So welcome, Amy. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Now, so can you tell us what is a certified life after baby loss coach?
Yeah, always a great question. To be honest, I'm like, what do I call myself sometimes? Because it is kind of a really unique space. But I myself have experienced a stillbirth and a miscarriage at 14 weeks and had a pregnancy after both of those losses. And so for me personally, what it means is I had just started really helping people because I had shared my story just organically. I was pretty open about it. And so just people started coming to me and saying, Amy, my friend lost their baby. What do I do? What do I say? How do I help them? Or, they would say, even strangers would just refer me and say, talk to Amy, like she'll help you. She'll help you kind of figure out what to do. And through some great opportunities I had with volunteer work, I also have been able to actually go into hospitals right in the moment when these families are there, brokenhearted, have just delivered a baby who's passed or who was born too early or born still, and be able to be there like on the front lines, just helping them make memories, helping them really just, when they're in that complete and utter shock and devastation. And that's been just such a beautiful experience. And so a few years back, I found an amazing podcast, which I love podcasts so much. So I love that you do this. I think it's so helpful because I found a life coach that I needed. And a lot of people say, like, what's a life coach? It's really a broad definition. And anyone can really say they're a life coach, which I think has pros and cons. So I think people need to be really, really careful when someone's just calling themselves a coach. Like, what does that really mean? But for me, I ended up finding someone I loved. I love the way she taught a lot of ways to just think about how we're thinking. I think it's a lot similar to like CBT, like cognitive behavioral therapy, just like how our thoughts create our feelings. And so there was this framework and this structure. So I took an actual year-long life coach training, but I knew all along I am going to help people who are grieving a baby because I think this piece is really helpful. but it's not everything. There's so much that goes into grief and healing from grief and that journey and being able to understand it. And so I really started my business bringing that in, like bringing my heart, my experience. It's almost like you speak another language, really, and probably you understand. Like there's some things you just have to have experience to be able to just really speak that language. So I have been doing that, helping people, just walking them through from wherever they are, whether it's, I've had people reach out to me between when their baby died and the funeral and just say, what do I do? I've had people who years later are just full of regret or anger and they just like can't figure out how to let it go. I have people that are trying to figure out if they should have another baby and just paralyzed because it's so scary. And I just help walk them through that. And I did recently just do the David Kessler grief educator class, which was amazing. Um, but the best thing I found about that is I love that it just reiterated kind of what I was already doing. And just showing that like the way that I'm helping and coaching people um, is a good way. Just being there for them. So that's a long answer to your question. Um, but I would say just as a caveat, like as a coach, I'm not able to help like someone who's really struggling with like a diagnosis, like an anxiety, like mental health disorders. Probably best to go to like therapy, different types of professionals. Um, but I also think coaching can work well with it. I do have clients that are in therapy and they also love baby loss coaching because again, like it's just like a different connection. Um, but yeah, I think that a coach is just really someone that's going to walk with you and be with you. And also, I have a lot of tools that I feel like are very, very helpful for people who know this type of grief.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a good answer. It helped us think of a lot more questions, I feel like, for you. Okay, so one of the things you mentioned was you kind of started out with people were already seeking advice from you and reaching out if they had a friend or family member who experienced a loss and asking for advice. What is some advice you would give to somebody who is trying to reach out to a friend or family member who have had a loss?
I would say number one, I did do a whole podcast episode because so many people would ask me and like people reach out on Instagram. I'm like, why don't I have a podcast episode? So I think it's called like when your friend has a miscarriage or something like that. But really, I always say the biggest thing, and you both probably know this, is just you don't need to fix it. Grief is a natural process and it's just part of the deal, but we're so uncomfortable with it. We're so uncomfortable with people being sad. Like we want to find the silver lining. We want to wrap it up with a bow. We want our person back, right? We want them how they were. And so that leads people to saying like platitudes and cliches and looking for the bright side. At least you weren't further along. At least, you have other kids. At least you can try again. Um, and those things are just so hurtful. So I would say you don't have to really say anything to try to fix it. I think just being a safe place for them to share and to be honest and understand that this is going to take a while. Um, but having someone there who will just listen um, and just say, yeah, that sounds really hard, just validating their experience. And that can be tough as the friend, as the loved one, watching someone you care about suffer. And so definitely take care of yourself if you are really close to someone who's grieving. And I always say something is better than nothing. In that same vein of like, sometimes we'll say, don't do this and don't do that. Like it's hurtful. So people get paralyzed. I remember before I lost my daughter, I had a friend who lost a baby at about 7 months, but like an acquaintance. And I remember thinking, I want to bring her flowers. Like I want to do something, but I'm not sure. And they were very, very private. And and they were kind of grieving their own way. And I was like, should I take them flowers, or is that weird? Is that, I just had this whole internal battle with myself. And in the end, I didn't do anything. And I always think of that and think, why didn't I do something? And then after, when I had my miscarriage, which was my second loss, I had a total stranger that did bring me flowers. We had just moved. She heard through our church group that I had had a miscarriage. She brought flowers. She sat with me. She visited. And I will never forget her, right? Because that meant so much. So I think something is better than nothing, and offer what you can offer. Um, the saying, like, let me know if you need anything. I just don't recommend that when someone is suffering or grieving. And I know it's just like it rolls off the tongue. We're so used to it. But how I put it is, on a good day, if you're kind of struggling with life, you're probably not going to reach out. So when you're really lost and you have no energy and you're hurting and you're upset, like, you're not going to be like, oh, I'd really like someone to fold my laundry. Like, maybe I'll call my neighbor to come fold my laundry in my messy house because I can't get out of bed and like I haven't showered in 3 days. Um, it's just not going to happen. So be specific and say, I want to bring you a lasagna. Um, was Thursday or Friday better? And that just takes such a weight off the grieving person. So yeah, that's usually the advice I would give, is like, you don't have to fix it. Just be there, and be there for the long haul. I think be there when the casseroles stop coming. Because after that first month, and everyone's, for a while, everyone's there and supporting, then everyone goes back to their real life. And that's when the grieving person is thinking, oh, this is real. This is real. So put important dates in your phone, just check on them. So many people texted me just here and there, just, hey, how are you doing today? And I knew that they meant it, like they wanted to know. And that was hugely helpful.
Absolutely. I love that. Just checking in, and some of the phrases, examples you gave, even when you said it, I could see my face in the camera being like, ugh. Because when people say, well, at least you have other children, right? At least you're young enough, you can have another baby. Then really what it does is it takes those feelings that are natural of grief, of loss, of anger, sadness. It takes those feelings and now it paints it in a light of, if I'm feeling that feeling, now I'm not grateful for my other kids.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not grateful. Now I'm taking care and attention from other moms who don't have other kids, right? So it paints all of these situations in our head, just that one line of, at least you have, at least whatever it is, of, okay, now I'm feeling like other people expect me to be grateful for those things instead of feeling how I'm feeling. And now not only do I feel the loss, but now every time I feel the loss, which is hard enough to feel on its own, now I also feel guilty that I'm not appreciative of my other child, right? So it sets up this false dichotomy that says either you can feel sadness and loss or you can be grateful. And the two, they're not opposites, right? Like, they're not mutually exclusive. You can do both in any given moment. You can feel extreme gratitude one moment and you can feel extreme loss the next moment. You can feel them at the same time. And those kinds of phrases of, well, at least this, right? Or look on the bright side, at least it's not as bad as so and so. Those phrases just do that damage because it sets that up for us later when we're having those feelings, and it sets up another barrier for us to be able to feel the things that we need to be able to feel in that moment. And so I love that you bring that up to people, because I think that it is really easy to say those things. We see that all the time with people. And then I love also what you said about let me know when you need anything. That phrase is like not
Just throw it out. Just throw it out.
right? Like that phrase of, because what it does is it puts another task on the plate of the person that you are trying to help. So and it's easy to do, right? When we say it, it doesn't mean we're a bad person. It just means that we're not maybe understanding what that does on the other side for the other person. So for example, my sister-in-law lost her sister this year. And I said, let me take care of like this Christmas task this year for you, right? But if I had said, let me know if you need anything, there's no way she ever would have been like, hey, can you like buy all these presents for me and wrap them? Right? Like, there's no way she would have said that to me because I wouldn't say that to somebody, right? But when somebody's like, hey, I'm going to do this, what do you think about these ideas? Then it really does do what we're trying to accomplish when it takes something off of our plate instead of adding something back on.
Yeah. Well, and for sure, it's kind of like a lose-lose because what if they do say something and you're not able to do it, you know? And then it's like they did be brave. They were brave. They reached out and you're like, "Oh, I'm just busy or I don't want to do that or whatever." So it's yeah, it's definitely awesome. I love that you did that for her. The holidays can be so hard. So
Absolutely. I also love that you go to the hospitals and you're with families as this is happening in real time. If hospitals are interested in that, or if a patient would like their hospital to provide that kind of service, how would they go about doing that?
I have a lot of thoughts about this, but I will keep it brief. I will just say, especially in the US and other countries, the standard of care is wildly different. There are hospitals that are killing it. Their bereavement programs are incredible. Um, they have volunteers, they have supplies, they put it in the budget, they like have support groups after, they have amazing resources. And there are other hospitals that have nothing to the point of, I've seen some pretty difficult situations, pretty difficult ways that babies are treated, presented, ways that families are treated and presented. There's a lot of difference between the ER, which sometimes if you're earlier or even later, sometimes people really get stuck in the ER, and where maybe the hospital and labor and delivery has amazing resources. It's like the ER is a different planet. So I get emotional about it because I think there are so many people really pushing to make this better. But to answer your question, the best thing you can do is call your local hospital. Try to find the right person. Now, this is also tricky because I've actually, in some of my volunteer work, that was part of what I did was like calling hospitals and offering we I worked with a charity that makes like little tiny diapers and blankets and hats for tiny stillborn babies because these families, like, you don't have something for a baby that's like this big, I'm holding my hand. It's like a tiny, like a 20-week baby. Um, so you would have like grandma trying to go buy doll clothes or something, you know. So as I would call these hospitals, it's like sometimes they have a bereavement person, sometimes it's the head of labor and delivery, sometimes you have to get in the hospital bureaucracy, which is tricky. Um, but I think just the more people that reach out and say, hey, I have some time, I care about this. How can I help you support families who are grieving the loss of a child or a baby? Um, that's the best way. And then just searching in your local area, because again, there are certain states that have, like, I went to a stillbirth conference and I can't remember the state. I feel like it's Minnesota, but don't quote me. Where they have actually gotten together with the government to make sure that any person that loses a baby gets support. But because of just the way things work and the way like everything goes, that's very rare. And so a lot of people slip through the cracks. Like when I lost my daughter, she was stillborn at full term. Someone came and helped me because her nephew had passed. Her nephew's family had gotten good care. And so she had done a little training to be able to do like little hand and feet molds. And she had started sewing little clothing. And um, she knew that you could take pictures. Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep is a pretty widespread one for pictures. But they also have a lot of rules, like of when they'll do, like what gestation they'll do and things. We did any gestation, but in my miscarriage, I ended up having surgery, and I didn't even get a pamphlet. And so I mean, there's just such a variation. So I think, again, if this has touched your life or if it's on your heart and you're listening and you're saying, I wonder, I would say reach out to your local hospital, start there. Usually they're very grateful for anything that anyone can do, and pretty open to it, because it's hard on the nurses. It's hard on like they want to be able to help. And when they have nothing to give these families, um, I mean, not to be graphic, but like when babies are sitting in a bucket, in a cup, in a stainless steel bowl, like it's rough. So I think the more dignity, the more we can realize, like, no matter the gestation, these babies matter, they're loved. That helps. And then also, I think as far as the grieving process, the care you get in that moment in the hospital, um, or even at home, like some people don't get to be at the hospital, but there's a lot of trauma, I think, that comes from what happens um, during the delivery, which it is usually like you're delivering a baby. So I think it just gives people such a good start on processing their experience. And we've come a long way. And I think that's because people have said, we don't want the baby to be whisked away. Like, we want to make memories. We want this time to process. And it's just so helpful. So yeah, I would say just being aware. Pictures are okay. Not everybody wants them. Some people think it's weird. Some people think it's morbid. But making those memories is so important. So if anyone listening is in that situation, like I say, the more we can do, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you mentioned how you had some resources after your first loss and then kind of none really, it sounds like, after your second. And it looks like you reached out to a counselor as well after your first one. Can you kind of go over what that experience was like, finding a counselor and getting those resources and help for yourself set up?
Yeah. So my daughter was stillborn at 39 and a half weeks, and we were obviously devastated. And we lived in a really small town, really far away from any kind of like city or whatever, like hours and hours away. And so I had to look for online resources. So I did find like Facebook support groups and different things. But pretty quickly after we lost our daughter, her name's Lauren, I we kind of decided, well, obviously we're not in control of our lives. Like, we really want to have a baby. We don't want to replace our baby, but we really like we don't want things to end like this. So we kind of like left it up to God or biology or whatever, whether or not we would have another baby. And I did get pregnant quite soon after. So it was probably 4 or 5 months after having a full-term stillbirth with a picture perfect pregnancy. Like, no, we didn't see any problems whatsoever. It was my fifth daughter. Like, I knew what I was doing. My doctor was great until she wasn't kicking. And so I went into this pregnancy, and I have been lucky enough that I'm like pretty even as far as my mental health. Um, but when I saw those two pink lines, I had what I would say is a panic attack. Like, you want it and you think it, and like, but it's terrifying, like absolutely terrifying. And at the time I didn't know this, but I've like learned a lot more, and this is what I bring to my clients, but really it is like that. It's a nervous system reaction to, like, pregnancy equals danger, but pregnancy is supposed to equal happy, right? Like it's supposed to be so good. And for anyone who hasn't experienced loss, two pink lines is I'm going to get a baby, right? We're planning ahead, we're jumping ahead in our minds. Sometimes we're like, oh, we'll wait to announce to the, 12 weeks just in case. But really, you think two pink lines equals a baby. Well, I saw two pink lines and I was terrified. And so I kept going, and I'm a very like self-helpy. That's what, like, all the books behind me, it's like I love it. And I had dived into grief in the same way. I'm going to read all the books, and I'm going to like do all the things, and I'm going to, heal myself and take care of my kids and take care of my marriage. Cause that's, a lot of people say that's really tough on a relationship. But this pregnancy after loss was tough. And it turned out that it was almost like a complete deja vu. So not only was I in the first year of grief, still counting, like she would have been 1 month, she would have been two, she would have been 6 months. This would have been her first Christmas. I'm doing that. And also, I'm like the same weeks as I was last year. So this rainbow baby is what we call it, like a baby born after kind of that storm of grief, was due, I think, like 3 weeks. So like a year and 3 weeks. And that's really common. A lot of people that have losses do go on to get pregnant again. And a lot of times this just times out like that. Um, and so, yeah, I was just like going through this pregnancy, so many triggers. I had to go back to my same doctor. I had to walk into the same hospital. I had to do something called non-stress tests, which is really where you just like, they put the baby on a monitor to make sure they're okay. I had to lay for 30 minutes alone in a room where I delivered my stillborn daughter because it was a small town hospital. There's 2 rooms. I just, twice a week. And it was really too much. And I was like, I need help. Like, I can't stop worrying. I can't stop being afraid. Like, I can't breathe. I'm doing all these things and I'm like doing it. If you saw me from the outside, like I'm taking care of my kids and I'm like, just handling life as we do, especially as women. Like we're really good at just soldiering on. Um, but inside, I mean, I was just kind of a wreck. And so I was able, luckily, to find, and that was back in 2014, before like Zoom was a thing and all of that. But I found counselors in my state who did do online. And it was like this encrypted, probably you guys know more about that than me, but it was like this encrypted thing you could do. And so I could meet with someone online. And so I reached out. It was a group that specializes in women, in trauma. And I just felt comfortable. And I asked their secretary, do you have someone who understands baby loss? And she said, yes, we have a counselor that had a stillbirth and she had a rainbow baby. And I was like, okay, like I have someone I can talk to. And it was just such a blessing and a miracle. And um, even though I remember like she had me do a lot of breathing exercises. So I know like she was also helping me with my nervous system. Um, Sometimes I like wanted more. I was like, can't you just fix this? And I know now that like it just is, right? It's part of it. I think just learning to carry the anxiety with you. I say put it in the passenger seat, right? Anxiety is gonna come with you on a pregnancy after a loss, but it doesn't get to drive. It's gonna go in the passenger seat, right? We're still gonna have some fun. We're still gonna enjoy the pregnancy and do what we can. But yeah, she really just helped me, and I was meeting with her weekly for quite a long time. And then I was like, okay, I think I'm doing a little better. And so we met every other week. Um, really up until, yeah, pretty close to delivery, which got scarier, you know? it just, the closer I got, the more I was like, what if something goes wrong? What if I didn't get the baby out in time? What if this? What if that? Um, so that was really scary, but he did live. Um, we had our first son, and um, yeah, I will forever be grateful that she was there to just, again, understand, to listen, and to help me just to breathe my way through it, and to have a place to talk about my fears and have them be validated. And she was really good at that, just letting me kind of share what was happening and help me through it.
Absolutely. It is very when a lot of times when people think of post-traumatic stress disorder or the panic attacks that can come when we're experiencing something that was very dangerous, that was life-threatening to us, uh, a lot of times that example is like a car crash, right? And so very similarly, except picture that it's a car crash and your child was in the seat next to you and passed away. That's the kind of trauma that we're talking about with infant loss, with stillborn babies, with miscarriage. And it doesn't, because it's not a physical of that, right? It's not like, oh, you were in a car crash. Okay, people kind of understand that, right? Or your 6-year-old was killed in that car crash. People kind of understand that and understand that no, this is a life-changing event. But when it comes to child loss, especially before the child is born or stillborn loss, uh, our support systems that we have in place don't always understand that no, this isn't like I was driving and I'm afraid now to drive. This was like I was driving and my child was in the car with me and passed. And so I like that you're showing that perspective because it is very real. And when people are going through those feelings, it can be even more heightened because of the complication of this is supposed to be a good thing. I'm
Mm-hmm.
expected to only be happy about this. And we see that a lot too with a lot of kinds of loss when it comes to especially something that goes throughout the year. And so if you were at the pumpkin patch at 6 months and then you're at the pumpkin patch again at 6 months, it each day can just bring that continual fear. So I really, really applaud you for sharing your story on your podcast, for sharing your story with others that you're helping, because until you go through it, and you've said this multiple times, until you go through it, it is so difficult to express that or to find other people who do understand that. So I just think it's amazing what you're doing and what you're sharing for others so that they can know that they're not alone, that that's not an abnormal reaction to have if you're not feeling
Right.
happy all the time about your next pregnancy, that it's scary. It's a scary time.
Yeah. Well, not self-judgment. I think because as a society, we do downplay, like, oh, you're only 6, we kind of like have this very much hierarchy of grief, especially when it comes to pregnancy or infant loss. And so the worst part about that, like, it's one thing if other people are doing it, but the worst part is we do internalize it. You can't not internalize it. And so then this person is not only terrified, pregnant again, whatever the situation, but they're judging themselves. Right. And so I think that's why it's really important to have someone on the outside of your own brain to say, like, no, this makes perfect sense. Like, you're not messing this up. Like, we're just so hard on ourselves. And so 100%, I think that's a huge deal. Is like losing someone is already hard enough, or being pregnant after loss is hard enough. But then we're like adding this extra suffering. And you actually can take some of that suffering away if you just have someone that's going to tell you, like, no, you're doing amazing. And like, this is normal, but you don't have to be so hard on yourself.
I also love what you said about coaching and counseling, because what you are doing as a certified coach is so important. And from a therapy perspective, coaches that are niched in, coaches that are there to support a client or a family in a specific area with a specific situation or specific challenge, are so incredibly important to the work that clinical mental health counselors are doing, maybe with that person or with that family on their diagnosable symptoms. And so I kind of think about therapy and coaching as, therapists. We're identifying a diagnosis, and we are kind of going into battle with you against that symptomology that's not serving us well or serving you well. And a coach is so the therapist is like, we're going in battle with this. And the coach is there as support. The coach has often lived that experience, so can be that support and saying, okay, this is what has been helpful for me, has been helpful for other people. What's helpful for you? And those are such important conversations. That's such important support. So I love that you're doing that, and that you've got clients that are working with a mental health counselor, but also working with a coach. And I believe that coaching is the next wave of counseling, right? Like 20 years ago, counseling was the Wild West. Counseling was where coaching is now. And so, there weren't state requirements on counseling and all of that. And coaching, I think the importance of coaching for people to have in their support system has been demonstrated over the last 20 years, and really is moving in that direction of more mainstream and more kind of parameters on what is a coach, right? And certifications. So I just think it's wonderful. At what point would you, in your coaching of somebody, at what point would you recommend that they add a therapist to their team?
Um, I mean, I kind of try to look for some of those, not red flags, but just things where I can tell um they're going to need more help than I can offer them. I've had clients where we're kind of working through things, and it's just really hard. Like, how do I even describe it? I guess it's like a feel to me, it's just like a sense. So, um, but yeah, obviously if they're saying things, I really do, thankfully, like my certification, we do like a suicide prevention thing. So I'm looking for those flags, because in grief, again, it's like wanting to lay down and die and go where your baby, like never wake up and go where your baby is, totally normal, right? So it's like, what's that line, So I do try to have like emergency contacts, have their, especially with online. It's like, I don't want to be on the other end of someone who's really struggling or wanting to hurt themselves or other people. And I can't do anything because all I have is their email. Right. So anybody listening that maybe is a coach or doing online things, I really recommend that. But yeah, if there's signs that their anxiety or their depression, like they're just really struggling, um, really feeling low, like when it's just really, really hard, um, sometimes I'll just say, like, is there something else we can do to support you? Like, have you talked to your doctor? Have you talked to a therapist? Um, and how can I support you in that? And really walking them to that step if they need to. For the most part, when I meet with people, I'm like screening that at the beginning. Like, I do have people come and talk to me first and like see if it's a good fit, if they like me, if they like my energy. That's something I'm sure you all say too, is like, try on all the therapists, look at lots of coaches. Like, that's why I love having podcasts, because you can get to know me and how I operate. Um, But as I'm meeting with people, I'm going to see like, what's their support system like? Are they functioning? I guess that's another one. It's like, are they kind of functioning on a day to day? For the most part, people that come to me, like they can come on a weekly Zoom, but I've had a few people that like, they can't do that. They'll say yes, and then they're like, it's not working. And so then I'm like, hey, like we probably need to get you help closer to where you are, physically closer to where you are and mentally. Like we really need boots on the ground. Um, if they can't, yeah, if there's like not meeting those baseline um, functions or like feeling like they're able to, um, I don't know, yeah, just take care of themselves. I just think we need all the support we can get. So it's an interesting line. But so far what I find is the people that do come to me are doing pretty well, and wanting the help that I can provide, and or they already have therapy, they're already right, or they've done therapy and they've kind of a lot of people kind of graduate or out of grief therapy, but then they're like, what now? And so that could really help them, right? That can be like that built the foundation that got them from like deep in the hole. That's what I say a lot about coaches. Like if you're deep in the hole, like maybe you need therapy. If we can bring it up, then a coach can take you like where you want to go next. Um, so sometimes you need therapy first, coaching later, or a mix, or one or the other.
Absolutely. I was curious too about the name of your coaching and podcast, Smooth Stone Coaching or Smooth Stone Podcast. Can you give it like tell us where that name came from?
I would love to. After Lauren died, I about 6 weeks later, there was a women's conference happening at the university that I graduated from. And they do it every year, and it's in May. And so she died in March, in the mid-March. And I was like, I just need something. I need to go. And I went to like a church school. So it's like religious based. But I was like, just, yeah, totally devastated. So I went to this conference. I was like, maybe I'll get some answers. Maybe I'll get some help. Maybe I can get some, inspiration. And I went to all the classes on trials and the classes on hard things and the class on like how to keep going when things are tough. And this one speaker shared a story of how grief is like a rock in your shoe. And there's many kind of variations of this, but how she told it was, grief is like a rock in your shoe. At the beginning, it's very sharp, very pointy, and every breath you take, it hurts. And like you can't get this rock out. And so you can't even think about walking. You can't, it's just like cutting you up and you're bleeding and it's awful. And you can't see a future where it's not awful. But as time goes on, as you do the work, you start to break the edges off. Your foot starts to get calluses where it needs to. And you learn how to walk kind of, putting it in a little spot that doesn't hurt as bad. Um, but every once in a while, or maybe lots of times, it hits a nerve and you're right back, right? You're just like on the ground, you hate it, whatever. You're in pain. But then you keep going, as we do, because we're amazing as humans. And the stone becomes smooth and you continue walking forward. And now when you feel that rock, you have it tucked right where it needs to be. You carry it with you. And it's just a reminder of the person that you loved. And we still wish it wasn't there. Like we still wish we could have our person. But you carry that stone with you, and what you mostly feel is love. And so that's what I wanted to name my business, because it was such a powerful image for me 6 weeks after delivering my beautiful, perfect baby, who just through some freak thing with the placenta just died. I was like, okay, like I could do this. Like I'm going to get there someday. And that's what I want to show my clients is you can do this too, and I'm going to walk with you um, through all those bumps and bruises, and you're going to do it too.
Absolutely. What a powerful image the smooth stone is. That is beautiful. Oh. And so how do you keep Lauren as part of your family? You've got other children. How do you keep her as part of your family? She's still one of your children. So how do you do that with your other children and letting them also have connection with their sister?
Yeah, and our other baby that passed is River. We didn't know the gender, um, but we we were able to bury Lauren. We weren't able to bury River. So Lauren, we have a cemetery, like we can go to the cemetery. And some of my kids like to go and some of them don't. Some of them makes them sad, some of them like it. And so I try to be really good about letting them lead, right? Like I don't have to make it mean anything if they don't want to go to the cemetery. My husband's similar. The cemetery is a sad reminder. And to me, it's like an awesome, like peaceful. I love going there. As you know, whatever that sounds like. I do. I find it so peaceful. But we have little shadow boxes that are in our main living room. We talk about them. We will sometimes include them in family pictures, like with the little last fall we did pictures and we got these little white pumpkins that we just like kind of put in the, had in the picture. That can be really helpful. Right after Lauren died, the lady that came and helped us, she gave my kids little stuffed animals and they held on to those. I think that's really important. And that's something we do when I do my volunteer work is like we make sure the siblings have a blanket or a toy or something to hold on to. We'll take pictures with, their little toy and the baby, and then they get to keep it. Stuff like that. But yeah, obviously I do this work and I've been doing this work Lauren died, she would be 11. Um, so it's kind of part of our life and that is, it has its ups and downs. I was telling my son about someone who was having a baby and he was like, "Oh, is their baby going to die too?" Like they just know. We've had lots of conversations and that's a different conversation. So I had little girls about ages 9 to 3 or 4 when Lauren died. And then they were a little older when River died. But I have my rainbow babies too. So I have 2 little boys and they also have questions and they also will be like, "Oh, so Lauren's older than like she would be this grade." And, you know, as they age, they have different questions. So I think that's really important to understand for people with children grieving. Like they're going to process it at the age they are, and they're going to have questions. And it's going to come up in the most random way. And just understand that's also super normal, and we don't have to fix it for them. That's what I tell a lot of people. It's like they'll ask this question and we're kind of like, whoa, like deer in the headlights. How are these words coming out of this sweet little face? Um, but a lot of times, again, it's just validating them, asking them the question back. My kids would say, "I really miss Lauren." And I'd be like, "Yeah, me too." "I wish Lauren would come back alive." And I'd be like, "Yeah, me too." It can be as simple as that, but we definitely have kept the conversation open. And I know it's different for everyone. I know there's people that like had a loss before living babies. And they're like, "How do I tell my kid? And when do I tell them? And I don't want to traumatize them." But then the longer you wait, the more complicated it gets. So definitely, I would say talk to someone, have someone help you through that for sure. Like there's so many resources out there for children in grief. But yeah, we have an album of her pictures. I made a little, what's it called? Like a shutter, like a photo book a while after she died. And I put all the memories. So like we had gone to Disneyland when I was pregnant, but like nobody knew. So we kind of made her life story into a photo book that's a little more maybe palatable for a child or for other people. I could be like, here's Lauren's like life story. And yes, there's some pictures of her after she's passed, when she was born. Um, but it's not just that she died, it's that she lived. Um, with River, it's harder. We don't know what gender we don't have. I have like an ultrasound photo, which I'm so grateful for, but it's just different. And so again, we just kind of roll with it. And but yeah, we love them both. We do believe that like we'll see them again. So yeah, I think just it's been mostly a natural thing, but not without effort. And I do think that's something people usually could use some help with, is just figuring out how to do that in their own family and what works for them, because it's so unique. There's no wrong way. But yeah, we love just like having them as a part of our family. We do birthdays. We do, we're still, we just keep them in our hearts always.
Yeah, I love that. Those are some really good ideas. And if you could give a suggestion then to somebody on the fence about either starting grief counseling or just counseling in general or coaching, what suggestion might you give them?
So something I always say is it never hurts to try. Like if it's not going to be harmful, whether it's like if you're going to read a self-help book, if you get one little nugget out of it, worth it. Right? If you're going to if someone's like, hey, do this essential oil, it's going to cure everything. You're like, you know what? If it doesn't hurt, why not try it? And I think with therapy, there can be a stigma. I feel like it's getting better, but it's still there. Right? So it's like, I would just ask yourself, like, why am I afraid to go? Um, and how can I support, like, see that this is a good thing to support me? If you're struggling, you just don't have to struggle alone. I think we feel so isolated. We're so connected, but we're so isolated. So I always say if life is hard, you need to build the best support team you can. And a lot of times we default to our friends and family. They are often not the best support for us. They don't have the tools. They might also be grieving, they might also be struggling. Like if you're struggling in your relationship, it's like you want your partner to be the one you talk to, but maybe you need an outside person. So I say build the best support team you can. Because like what's the downside? And it might be, money is always, it could be an investment for sure. But what's more important than like your mental health and your like moving through being a human, which is really hard sometimes. And there's nothing wrong with getting some support. And I think it's like one of the bravest, strongest things you can do. So if you're like, yeah, I would also ask that question. What am I making it mean if I get therapy? Because we might have some beliefs about who gets therapy. But I would say like everybody needs therapy. Everyone can benefit from someone to talk through what you're struggling with and guide you.
Absolutely. Well, we love your story. Thank you for sharing your story. We love that you're out there.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us and sharing Lauren and River's story.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Amy Watson, and I need a counselor.
Awesome. And I'm Chrissa Hunt.
I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
So do you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the You Need a Counselor podcast. We are so grateful that you're here. Now, we want to hear from you. Text us or give us a call at 515-650-3231. You can also find and connect with You Need a Counselor on Facebook and Instagram. If you've enjoyed today's show, please take a moment to like, review, or leave a comment, as all of these things help others to find and benefit from the podcast as well. If you're in the state of Iowa and interested in mental health counseling or behavioral health intervention services, give us a call at 800-531-4236.